Shane, what's up, man? Good to see you again. It's probably been close to a year at this point, I think, since our last hunt together.
Yeah, Ryan, good to see you too. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been almost a year now.
Are you going back to Arizona in January?
I don't think I am.
No?
Yeah, I don't think I am this year. I wish. I kind of have a lot of stuff happening this January. I'm trying to take my family on a uh, on a snowboarding trip, um, and then I also might have to do some coaching as well. Like there's a big surfing event at Sunset Beach on the
Oh,
North
nice.
Shore in January, and I might have to coach one of the athletes.
So do you do individual coaching or how does that work? I mean, people are hiring you, surfers are hiring you to coach them. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think of myself as a coach at all, um, but I've been coaching a little bit in the last couple of years. Last year, I coached a guy named Italo Ferreira. He, um, I coached him at the Pipeline Masters here on the North Shore in Hawaii, and he was going for the world title at the time. He ended up doing really well in the event. He won the world title last year, and it was incredible. And he won the event as well. So I'll be coaching him this year again at the Pipe Masters, and he wants me to also work with him for the Sunset event in January.
What type of like what does that actually look like? Because when I think of it, and so this is my ignorance speaking, when I think of it, I'm like, okay, well, like, are you teaching him balance? Are you teaching him to read the wave? Like, what is it exactly? Like, I don't know what you'd be
No,
coaching him on. I'm really curious.
it's more just a game plan. Like
Ah,
in a competitive situation, it's more of a you know, watching the surf, watching the conditions, watching all the previous heats and who's winning and how they're doing it, who's losing and why that's happening, and just try and formulate a game plan and keep the athlete in a good mindset, super confident and erasing all the noise and focusing on what needs to happen in that time frame. When you're competing, you get really emotional. You get excited or worried or anxious or whatever it is. And I feel like as a coach, someone who's a really good coach is going to just keep you in a really solid mindset and keep what's really important at the front of your mind.
got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's more of the soft skills than the actual skill of surfing. Because I mean, this is a guy who's probably been surfing for 3 or 4 decades. So it's like, what are you going to teach him, right? That he doesn't already know or hasn't experienced.
Yeah, there is nothing I know about surfing technique that he doesn't.
That's what I'm saying.
I'd kill to be able to do the things that he can do on a surfboard. I mean, he's one of the greatest surfers of all time. So it's just fun to work with him because he's a student of the game. He wants to get better all the time. He's actively training and practicing and surfing as much as he possibly can. So it's fun to work with a guy like that. It's infectious, that energy level. He's just incredibly passionate about what he does, and it's a lot of fun. So I don't
Yeah.
really see myself as a coach, but if I can help people to do a little better, it's a good thing.
Do you enjoy that side of it? I mean, I imagine there's a side of just writing, for example, and then there's this whole other aspect that goes on behind the scenes that the average individual just doesn't see or appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, I started surfing when I was, I learned to swim when I was like 2, and then I started riding waves when I was like 3, and I started surfing on a surfboard when I was 5. And
Hmm.
so it's really all I've ever known in my life. So I'm still wildly in love with surfing, and it's a huge part of my life. It's really given me pretty much everything I have at this point. It's how I met my wife. It's how I make a living. It's what I do with my kids to share time. It's what we do for family trips. And so, I mean, it really encompasses a lot of, like, a huge portion of my life, and it's a really positive thing for me. So, now I'm getting a bit older. I'm 48, and so I've been surfing professionally for a very long time, and now it's really fun for me to start working with with like some kids, some up and coming kids, the next generation, and yeah, it's just a lot of fun to help them along their path.
I'm curious what you think about as you talk, because I see you with. Do you have 3 boys? Do you have?
I
Is
have
that right?
2 kids. I have a boy who just turned 14, and I have a girl who just turned
Okay.
11.
And so both of them surf.
Yep, they both surf. My son is very into it. He's pretty much all he thinks about, all he wants to do.
Is that right?
And he's starting to become like competitive and stuff and getting sponsors and all that. And then my daughter loves to surf. She surfs with me. She's more of like a social surfer. So she surfs with me and then, or she'll surf with her buddies. So she just
Okay.
goes out there and chats with all like her little girlfriends and stuff. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, that's cool to see. So, do you see? It's interesting to me because when we're in the midst of things, I think we think that we're at the pinnacle of our achievement, whether it's surfing or hunting or podcasting or any facet of life or something that we're interested in. I'd be really curious what you see as the evolution of surfing and how not only your children but the other young kids that you are coaching and teaching and instructing, what you think they'll be able to do for the sport itself that maybe you and your generation hasn't accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, the sport of surfing is pretty darn young as far as like competitive surfing goes. It's really only since like maybe the '70s and really more like the '80s, and where it's
Right.
become like a professional sport. And now it's in the Olympics, and the mainstream corporations are coming into the space, and there's a lot of money flowing into it. So it's just grown a ton, and things have gotten more serious as far as all that business side of things goes. But I mean, at the heart of it, people fall in love with surfing because it's fun. It keeps you young, keeps you sane. It's great exercise. It's just a really really fun thing to do. So yeah, I mean, it's just been a really good part of you know my life, and for the kids that I work with, it's just a really healthy thing for them to do, all the time. So yeah, I'm pretty grateful in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's cool to be able to see not only yourself but your kids and the people you coach have this outlet because it seems to me, and I look at my own kids. I've got 4 kids, and I see so many different outlets that they could take that are not healthy for them, right? Like
Yeah,
whether it's drug abuse or alcohol abuse or just buying into the misconceptions they hear from their peers. And I think about this outlet for us. It happens to be hunting, specifically with my oldest son, and that's something that's relatively new to me. But I see a lot of similarities between what you're doing with your kids and what I'm doing with my kids in different aspects. But just being able to channel that energy towards something that's going to improve them physically and mentally and emotionally is really really rewarding to watch and experience.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of distractions these days for kids. Probably more than ever. You know, when I was growing up, I'm sure when you were growing up, you know, life was a whole lot simpler then. There was no internet, like the video game thing was hardly a thing when I was a kid.
Yeah.
There was friends I knew had video game consoles, whatever, in their house, and they would get super into it. But hardly anybody had those things when I was a kid. I didn't really know anybody who had the money for video games, and like in my neighborhood, like literally nobody had them. So there was no social media, no smartphones, no um, you know Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all this stuff. So like these kids are growing up with so much more data, so much more marketing, so much more information, so many more distractions, and they're being forced to grow up a lot quicker, I feel like. And so if they can get into, whether it's hunting or surfing or snowboarding or soccer or something outdoors, something that they can do with their friends that's super healthy for their minds, for their bodies, for their soul. I feel like if they can find something like that at a young age, that's just gives them a huge advantage in life.
For sure. Did your folks teach you to surf, or where did you pick this up at such an early age?
So my parents, this was like in their early '70s, but my parents started a little restaurant right on the beach in
Okay.
Kona on the Big Island. And so I grew up in the restaurant, and right outside the restaurant was this like little beach, and that's where I learned to swim. That's where I started like riding waves on a bodyboard, body surfing. That's where I started fishing. I would fish every day when there was no waves. That's where I started diving, and that's where I met all my friends. So it just was like a natural thing for me to like spend my whole upbringing in the ocean. And I just fell in love with riding waves. The feeling of riding waves was just something that, I don't know, it sounds super cheesy, but it was such a cool experience. Like I never grew up in church or anything like that, but like something about like being out in the ocean with the sun coming up in the morning, and just that's all I needed was my surf trunks and my surfboard. And there was like every other kid growing up, you have really stressful times in your household. I grew up with my father was kind of a gnarly alcoholic, and my parents would scrap all the time. And they ended up getting divorced when I was pretty young, and so I had a lot of like crazy stuff happening in my life, not unlike everyone else. But surfing for me was like my outlet. It was like the thing I would always go to when I was stressed out or angry or upset or whatever it was. So surfing was always there for me. So that was a thing that made me really connect with riding waves when I was a kid.
Yeah, it sounds like that idea of the proximity principle, right? That the waves and the ocean was close to you, and so that's what you naturally gravitated towards. But I'm curious when you started to get more intentional about it, because as I understand it, you're a big wave surfer, right? And so that's different than somebody who's going to do a bunch of tricks on smaller waves and ride these short sets. So when did you start getting more intentional about it and deciding, okay, this is the path that I want to take, that I'm more excited about?
Well, it started when I was pretty young. I started getting into trouble. I started, getting into trouble with, started having bad grades and hanging around a bunch of stupid kids that were doing really stupid stuff. I started getting involved in that and started getting into trouble a little bit. This is like in 7th grade. And I kind of like, I got my surfboard taken away for a whole quarter until I got my grades better. And I realized really quickly, like, hey, this is like these choices that I'm making are bad choices, and they're taking me down a road that a bunch of idiots are on. Like my friends at the time were idiots. They were really hell bent on going in a bad direction.
Right.
I woke up to that when I got my surfboard taken away, and I kind of just turned away from like those choices and what was happening in my life at that time, and really hunkered down and in the surfing thing. And I was like, this surfing thing's bringing great things to my life. And I had some really cool mentors at the time come and talk to me about what was happening in my life, and just really helped me kind of with that perspective. And so ever since then, I just became hyper focused on surfing. Soon after that, I asked my mom if I could move to the North Shore of Oahu, which is like Mecca for surfing. So
Right.
I had a job at the time, and I saved up some money, and I shipped my car over to the North Shore and went to school there, 9th through 12th grade, and lived with friends, lived on couches, and basically just lived surfing. And I was obsessed with getting better, and I really wanted to do it for a living. I had some friends that were working towards the goal of surfing as a pro, and so I just kind of got on that program. I was really excited about kind of going in that direction. I kind of poured all of my energy into that goal.
What when you talked about mentors as coming into your life when you were younger, how did you find those mentors? Did they find you? Are these guys that you surfed with? Like what led you down the path to find those guys in particular, or those individuals?
One of them probably was one of them was my surf shop sponsor at the
Okay.
time. So I had a little surf shop sponsor that was helping me. And when I started doing bad in school and things started kind of going the wrong direction for me, she actually asked me to come in and talk to her. And so she had a pretty long conversation with me about life and about decisions and about friends and about who we hang out with, and that just like we don't get a second chance. Like the basic message from a couple of these people were like, you don't get a second chance to do this. You get one chance, and so don't screw it up. It's a blessing. You got to be really grateful for this opportunity to be alive. I mean, I have no excuse. I have 2 arms, 2 legs. I can run fast. I can swim far. And so I don't want to take it for granted, And so it was one of those, it was like a wake up call, like just get your shit together. Basically, it was a message.
what did she see in you? Like, is that a relationship that you actively went out and you were trying to get sponsorships, or did she approach you? Like, how did that relationship form?
I think she just saw some potential. And then as far as like, I think she'd seen a lot of kids from my area grow up with some potential. And then, like we all do, we see kids going down the wrong path and they become burnt out or get into drugs, or they start hanging out with a bunch of scrubby kids and just doing stupid stuff. And that just leads, like we all know where that leads. Those kids start going, keep on that bad path. And, they crash and burn. She didn't want to see that happen to me. And I was showing a lot of potential in the surfing thing. And so she really wanted to support me and not see me go down that bad road. And so I was super grateful, and I'm still friends with her today. And it's, I feel like you don't need that many mentors in life. You can just even be one, but in those moments where, you may not be making the best decisions, it's your real friends and people who really care about you who are going to step up and actually keep you in check.
Yeah, I mean, mentorship is weird because a lot of the guys that listen to the podcast will ask me questions like, "How do you find a mentor?" And they think it's this kind of strange one-on-one Obi-Wan Kenobi
Yeah.
type relation, and it's like real formal. And I haven't found it to be that. I have mentors come and go, and sometimes they're there for a couple of weeks, or sometimes somebody just says something. Like maybe you say something in this podcast, and I'm like, yeah, man, and that sticks with me for the rest of my life. And other
Yeah.
times it's a longer relationship. But I just think we're like, when it comes to mentorship, we're trying to fit this like our idea or our notion of it, and it limits us to just these random interactions that we might have with people that could radically change our lives.
Yeah. And like for some people, like Joe Rogan is their mentor.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right, for
Like,
sure.
and they've never met Joe. They, you know, they, it's, it can be anything, right? It can be just something in your life that just makes a lot of sense to you and like talks some sense into you, even if you don't even know that person personally. Um, I feel like that's what, podcasts are so good in that way. I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts all the time, but I feel like mentorship, for some kids, they don't even have access to it. There's a lot of kids they literally don't know a single adult that they really, really look up to. I mean, there's kids out there for sure like that. I was really lucky in that I did have adults. My mother was an amazing role model. She had tons of discipline. She was a really hard worker, incredibly smart, just really hardworking. And so I had a great example in my own home. And so she was not only my mom, she was definitely a mentor in my life. So I really had no excuse.
Yeah, I mean, we can craft all sorts of excuses, right? But usually, usually when we look back, they don't really hold any weight. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I'm really curious because my wife spent a little time in Hawaii on the Big Island, and she didn't really have a positive experience, and so I'm really curious what it was like for you growing up in Hawaii as a white kid. Did you see any challenge with that? Did you have to get into fights? I'm just really curious of your perspective from that angle.
Yeah, that's kind of a funny question, because if you've never been to Hawaii a long time ago and you've only been to Hawaii in like the last 10, 15 years, then that question makes no sense.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, in the early 70s when I was a little kid, um, white people were the minority
Right.
for sure. In my classroom, you look at my school pictures when I was in first, second, third, fifth grade, there was very few white kids. And we were like second class citizens. There was tons of racism. We were looked down upon and called names, and it was pretty intense. I was pretty lucky. I was really good friends with a lot of like big Hawaiians. And for some reason, I really don't know. I think I knew some of them from surfing and stuff like that, but I never really had a hard time when I was a kid, but definitely just in general, being a white kid when I was a kid, in the town I grew up in was definitely it made for challenging situations for sure. Like a lot of people like would call you out for fights and stuff like that all the time.
Right. Yeah, and that was kind of my wife's experience, as she spent a couple of years there with school, like she was really picked on and really bullied. So I was wondering if you feel like that had any sort of, I'm sure it had an effect on you, but I'm wondering if it changed some of your mentality, not towards another person or anything, but just changed who you are, or maybe gave you a competitive edge, anything like that.
What's that? Sorry, I didn't get that last part.
I said if it changed you, not necessarily your outlook on other people, but gave you an advantage or a competitive edge, or you were able to utilize some of that as fuel, something like that.
Yeah, I think it was just a wake up call that, hey, like, like life isn't always perfect. Life is, there's people are flawed, and we all are, and so to experience being treated a certain way because of the color of your skin is a radical wake up call when you're a kid, because that's all learned. That's all learned behavior. We're not born that way. We're not born seeing people by their skin tone, right? So like, it's so funny. There's probably a lot of people listening to this podcast like, what is this guy talking about? He's got white skin. There's no one is judging him
Right.
for his skin color.
Right.
But things are totally different in different parts of the world. And where I grew up having white skin wasn't cool when I was a kid. So, but yeah, it was definitely a situation where I felt like I had something to prove. I felt like, it did give me fuel, like to get hated on when I was a kid a little bit. And I just let it kind of fuel me. And I don't really know how to answer that question really well, but yeah, I think it was a really good lesson learned at an early age for sure.
Yeah, and I'm not looking for the perfect answer. I'm just really curious as to your impact and how that might have changed you or made you see the world, not even the world, just your corner of it, right? Your community. I am really curious though. One thing that it sounds like you have a lot of respect for your mother, which I feel the same way about mine. And I'm interested in you approaching her. It sounds like you were maybe ninth grade or so. It sounded like, or 9 years. I can't remember, ninth grade or 9 years old, somewhere in there.
Ninth grade.
Ninth grade. Okay. And you approached her and said, "Hey, I want to go to North Shore," and I'm sure you had some friends and things like that. What made her agree to that? Like, what is it that she saw, or what was her justification, for lack of a better term, for allowing her, 13, 14-year-old to go to a completely different island and go pursue his dreams at that age?
Honestly, she said flat out no when I asked her. And she said, there's no chance you're going over there by yourself. There's no chance you're moving to a different island and staying at your friend's house. And so I had to really negotiate with her for a couple of weeks. It was all about my grades. It was all about my grades. I had to basically have this huge thing of rules, all these things I had to abide by. And the second I either had bad grades or I skipped school even one day, I was coming straight back. And I had saved up a bunch of money from my job at that point. So I just I was a pretty independent kid already at that age. And so I spoke to my friend and his family, who his father was shaping my surfboards at the time. Can you hear me still? It's kind of raining.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I can hear you just fine. Yeah, the background
cool.
noise makes it more interesting. So yeah, we got you, man. You're all good.
Cool. Yeah, so it was funny because my surfboard shaper at the time, I was really good friends with his son, and they said, hey, if you get the green light from your mom, you're welcome to come over and live with us. And so I basically negotiated with my mom for a couple of weeks straight, and eventually she said, hey, as long as you follow all these rules and abide by them and have a lot of respect for this contract, then you can go. But the second you screw up, you're coming straight back. And so, but that was a huge opportunity for me, and that was a crazy, even now looking back, she's like, what was I thinking, letting you go over there when you were, just barely 15 years old?
Yeah, because I look at my oldest son is 12, and in 2 or 3 years, I can't imagine turning him loose. Even if he had this desire to do this one thing, it would be a difficult it would be a difficult choice and a huge sacrifice on the part of a mother to be able to do that. She must have seen something in you that allowed that to be okay, and that's actually pretty telling, I think, itself.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely was like hyper focused as a kid, and I had a huge goal in mind, and I was working towards that goal, and at that point I was pretty on the straight and narrow as far as like getting good grades and really not doing anything too stupid. And so I just asked her to trust me and said, hey, this is what I really, really want to do. This is all I want to do. This is the only thing I want to do in my life. And so please give me the chance to do this. And she just said, hey, I'm going to put you on a short leash, but you can go.
Yeah.
And I had a ton of respect for her because she gave me that independence. She said, you're really going to have to earn this. And, I'm just incredibly grateful because in my life, that was such a turning point. That was like the biggest thing ever for me, having that independence and an opportunity and having the trust of my mom, who I looked up to so much. Say, hey, look, kid, you can go and do this. Like, I really trust you. I want you to have what you want in your life. That was a huge thing for me. And it's funny because my kid just turned 14 and I would never in a million years let him move out of the house. And
That's what I was going to ask you next.
And go live at somebody's house. No chance. But he's also I'm a different parent. He's a different kid. So things are just different these days. And also at the time, my mom was a single mother, struggling to make ends meet. She had 2 jobs. She was hardly ever home. My dad was kind of out of the picture. And so in my household, it's totally different, right? I have a pretty functional marriage. I have a great wife. She's a great mother. We have a pretty solid family foundation in the house. So there's not really, and my kid, who's very focused on surfing as well. He has a lot of opportunities that I never had.
Right.
Like we're here on the North Shore right now, in a big part because of my kid loves to surf. So.
Yeah, I mean, you've and you've done this, so I don't want to diminish or take away from what you've done, but you've created a lot of congruency in your life, which gives yourself the opportunity to provide things for your children that maybe you didn't have those same opportunities. So you've done that. But then also just in modern times, right, the society in which we live allows us to create these lives where we can do anything that we want to do and still provide and still lead and do all the things that we're quote unquote supposed to do. Did you ever think that surfing would become what it is for you? Did you think you could make a career and make income and then provide for a family? Was that even on your radar when you were younger?
Never in a million years. I never saw it coming. I never knew it had any kind of potential the way it turned out. It's been a crazy ride, honestly. I never thought I'd be able to make a living from surfing. And then when I started making a living from surfing when I was like 20, I thought that by the time I was like 27, 28, I would be retired from surfing. I thought I would have to get a job and do something totally different. And then when I was 27 or 28, I thought at the longest this thing will last until I'm like 31. And then when I was 31, I thought for sure it's going to be over when I'm 35. And I'm 48. And I just recently signed a 3-year contract with my clothing sponsor. And I'm still renegotiating my contracts now with existing companies. And so it's really strange. I'm baffled all the time, but it's still happening.
Isn't that amazing? So the way I understand it, primarily your income is derived, and not specifically you, but income from these athletes derived from sponsorships. I mean, that's the big income source. Is that correct?
For sure. It's just about working with brands and, working with their marketing teams to get their message out there, their brands out there, their campaigns out there. I surf for Billabong Clothing and Wetsuits. They're from Australia originally, but now they're global, and their whole DNA is in surfing, and they have an incredible surf team of young kids coming up and world champions. And so, my job basically is to, get exposure for the brand, get exposure for myself, keep doing what I'm doing, riding waves and being a mentor to kids. And it's really difficult to explain. I still think it's strange to get paid to go surfing. doing that for a very long time now. And every time I look at checks coming in the mail, I'm shocked. Because like when you're doing something you absolutely love and get paid for it, it is very surreal. And I feel like I definitely don't have a job.
Are there things though about the, maybe not your, your quote unquote job, but about the industry that you struggle with, that you have to do and you have to complete, but it isn't enjoyable to you and you wish if you could wave your magic wand that you wouldn't have to do these types of things, whatever those are?
For sure. And I'm not complaining at all. I'm incredibly lucky and grateful for what I get to do for a living. But yeah, every single job, no matter whether you're Tom Brady or whether you're the president of the United States, it looks really good from one side of the coin. But if you look at the other side, there's always drawbacks. There's always sacrifices that these people are making. Huge ones, especially like if the job is really good, then you're making massive sacrifices. Like there was, for 15 years of my life, I was out of the country for 10 months a year. And then when I had really young kids and I got married, I was spending tons of time away from home because I had to. It's my job. And so even now, I still travel probably five or 6 months a year. And that's my job, is to travel. I'm always traveling. That's like a huge part of my work. So
do you take your family with you when you travel?
It's non-negotiable. Sometimes I do. And now, because there's so much synergy between what I do and my son is very interested in surfing, and he's also kind of surfing for a living already. I take him with me a lot, but I'm not able to take my daughter and my wife a whole lot, but I do take them on certain trips. But yeah, so that's the sacrifice. I don't get to be home all the time. I don't get to see my wife and daughter as much as I would like to. But everybody, the thing is, when I'm at home, even though I'm away from home like 4 or 5 months a year, when I am home, I'm there for my wife, and I get to see my daughter 24 hours a day. You know what I mean? I'm there when she's going to school, like before this whole COVID thing. I'm getting her up in the morning and helping her make lunch and making sure she's done her schoolwork, and taking her to school and picking her up from school and taking her surfing and making sure she's doing her schoolwork, and reading with her in the evenings and putting her to bed. Like I'm there 100% when I'm at home. So it just looks different. Instead of me being away 8 hours a day at my 9 to 5, I'm gone 5 months a year. And so when I'm home, I'm not working. So it just looks a little bit different.
For sure. I mean, it's just a different dynamic. How does your wife deal with the dynamic? I mean, she married a surfer. Like she probably, it sounds like, does she surf as well? It sounds like maybe she does.
No, she doesn't.
Oh, she doesn't. Okay.
No.
So she married a surfer. She knew you were a surfer. So, I mean, she kind of at some point probably knew to some degree what she was getting into, but how has that evolved and changed in her perception of what you do now that you're 48 years old and you're still traveling 5-6 months a year?
She definitely knew what she was signing up for. Like the day she met me, I was already traveling full time, and this is what I've been doing for a living ever since she's known me. So it's completely normal for her. And we've been together for a very long time. We actually started dating when I was 20. And then so we dated. She was from California, I'm from Hawaii, and I was traveling full time. So we kind of had a long distance relationship for about 5 years. And then it just got to be really, really complicated when she was in college in LA, and then she started working full time and I was traveling full time. So we split up and stayed in touch and we're really good friends for about 3 years. And then we ended up getting married, and we've been married for, I think 18, 19 years now. And so we know each other really well. We have a lot of trust in our relationship. She's not like, me being gone for 3 weeks at a time is totally normal for her. We FaceTime all the time. We talk every day. And I don't know, it's just every relationship is different. I have a lot of friends who are like, oh my God, my wife would kill me if I was gone for 3 weeks. Or, oh my gosh, I need to talk to her on the phone for like 2 hours a day. Like sometimes I just text her once, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
During the day. And that's not weird at all. That's totally normal. And it's something that works for us,
Yeah, I think the dynamic's different for everyone. I was going to say that the times that I leave is probably actually really good for my relationship with my wife. She would probably attest to that as well. And then even when I'm gone, if I'm on a hunt or a trip or whatever it may be, is I may text her or shoot her a quick, 5-minute phone call, and that's adequate for us. So I think we've been able to create something that works well for our dynamic, and I keep those lines of communication open. And it sounds like you've done the same thing, and that's what works for you guys.
It is, yeah, and it works just great for us. The really hard thing is my daughter, because I get to take my son a lot, so I spend a ton of time with him. But a lot of times I have to leave my wife and daughter at home, and so I definitely spend a lot less time with my daughter. And so when I'm at home, I try and that's like at the forefront of my worries and my, like, as far as like being a father and stuff. I really try to put a lot of energy and effort into that, and that is something I really want to do right, and I really want to do well. I feel like we really only have one chance to do it right, and so I worry that I'm not spending enough time with my daughter. So that's like anytime I'm home, anytime I'm with her, I'm always trying to spend as much time as possible with her, take her surfing and do things she likes to do. So that's definitely something that I feel, as a father, that I have a lot of worry about that I'm unable to spend as much time as I probably should with her. And so I want to make sure she's okay all the time.
Do you feel like there's any sort of animosity, or has she ever expressed or voiced any concern that you're always with, your oldest, your son, and not with her? Is that something that she's expressed to you?
A little bit. It's something that I definitely don't avoid talking about. I mean, I speak to her about it all the time, and I try to explain to her like the reality of what I do for a living, and how I have to travel, and that he does the same thing for a living now, and that because of that, this is how our lives kind of look right now. But I do try to take her on trips as well, and she gets to travel, here and there. She's a very lucky girl. But yeah, I mean, I really don't want that animosity, and I don't see it yet. But I'm definitely already thinking about it, and I don't want that to be a real negative in her life growing up. I've seen that in the past with siblings, where one of them is extremely passionate about something and gets a lot of opportunities because of it. I mean, that's exactly what happened in my life. When I was a kid, I was already, like I said, I already moved away from home when I was in ninth grade. I was completely financially independent, like before graduating high school, and I was basically on my own, and I had a ton of opportunities because of my passion for surfing. And so I just grew up a totally different way, and that's kind of like repeating itself in my own household. And I just want to be hyper aware of how that's affecting my daughter.
I'm glad you brought it up, and the reason I even ask it is because not only do I deal with it, but I'm sure a lot of guys who are listening deal with it. Because again, my oldest son, he loves to hunt. I really enjoy hunting, so naturally we go out and we spend a lot of time out on the property, and we're taking care of the food plot, and we're sitting in a blind, or we're walking around the mountains because
Yeah.
I like it, he likes it, and so of course we're going to spend more time together. And so yeah, sometimes I do feel like I'm neglecting to a degree the others, and that's something that I personally wrestle with as well. So that's why I asked about it, because it is important to me, just as it sounds like it's important to you.
Yeah, it's very important. I mean, being a being a parent is the most important thing that I've ever done. And I really do feel like you only get one chance. You don't get a second chance to be a good father.
And it
And
goes
so
super quick, right? Like so fast.
it goes super quick. You blink and they're out of the house. So,
Yeah.
I already feel like that's kind of happening with my son. He's 14. He's growing up quick, and my daughter is 11. And like, I'm going to blink and they're both going to be out of the house. So this is the window of opportunity right now to be a good father. And so that's where I'm, putting a lot of my energy but it's a delicate balance, like everybody else probably listening to this podcast, watching this podcast. I mean, like, trying to balance family, work, finances, bills, time to go do what we want to do as well. Like for us, it's bow hunting, and that's like a huge part of my life. But trying to like balance that time, like carving out a little bit of time to do what I really enjoy doing, which is bow hunting, and then trying to be a good dad and trying to make sure my work thing stays intact. It's not easy, especially for a long period of time.
I definitely want to get into the bow hunting thing, but I'm curious, with you knowing as much as you know about the surfing community and the industry, Are there things that you are keenly aware of that you're trying to steer your son towards or away from? Like, how do you navigate those waters and teach him these are good paths, these are paths you ought to avoid, and pitfalls you need to be aware of? What are those types of things?
He doesn't really listen to me.
That makes sense too. I mean, that's pretty standard and typical as well.
Yeah, no, I mean he definitely doesn't seem like he is, but yeah, I mean I think because it's hard. It's kind of funny because he didn't want to surf. I mean, like when he was little, he didn't know any better. I would take him surfing all the time. Like I would put him on the front of a longboard or a soft top, and we would catch like little 6-inch waves. And we started off like that when he was literally in diapers. When he was 6 months old and he could just hold his head up straight, I was taking him to ride waves. And so before he had a chance to say no, he was already surfing. Mm-hmm. And then once he got a little bit older, they got like maybe 5, 6, 7 years old, I would take him surfing all the time. We would surf together. He would be on my board, or I'd take him on his little board by himself, and I would always help him out. And then he, when he got about 8 years old, 7 or 8 years old, he started skateboarding, and then he got really good at skateboarding super fast. And then skateboarding became his thing. He poured all his energy into skateboarding. He didn't want to skate. He didn't want to surf. Every day he just wanted to go to the skate park. And so I would spend hours and hours and hours and hours at the skate park with him. And then sometimes I would be like, hey, dude, we're going to go to the beach today. I know. And he'd be like, no, I don't want to go to the beach. I want to go skate. And I'd be like, dude, if I can take you to the skate park for 5 hours, you can come and catch 10 waves with me.
Right.
And so for a long time, he was like, dude, Dad, surfing is your thing. I'm a skateboarder. And he really was reluctant to surf. He didn't want to surf. I think he viewed it as it was Dad's thing. I want to do something that's my own.
Interesting. Yeah.
Which I totally understand. And I kind of anticipated that. We normally want to either be like our dad or totally be the opposite.
Yeah.
And so that wasn't super surprising to me at all. But I wasn't like, hey, you need to surf and get good at this because you need to do it for a living, or I need you to surf good. I honestly was simply wanting to have him fall in love with surfing, because for kids who fall in love with surfing, it is such a cool thing in their lives. I mean, it's such something that you can do until you're 90 years old. And normally it's just a really positive stress reliever and a way to connect with friends and stay connected to your friends over, decade after decade. It's like something that brings people together and is good for your soul. And that's literally the reason I wanted him to like surfing. And so for about 3 years, he didn't want to surf at all. And then slowly but surely he realized, hey, surfing is really fun. And my friends are starting to surf. This is when he was about 9 or 10 years old. And then once he realized all his buddies started surfing, then he's really social. So then he wanted to go to the beach every day and go surfing with them. And so it was a really natural thing. I never pushed him. I would take him to the beach all the time. And then once he started really liking to surf, then I would take him every single day and try to support him in that way. But really, even now, even though things have gotten a little more serious with sponsors and, business agreements and stuff for him, which is super strange.
Weird at 14, right? I'm sure.
I really am. Yes, it's really weird. It's paying taxes at 14 for surfing. So and that's a very strange thing for him. It's a very strange thing for me as a parent. But more important than all of that stuff is just keeping that healthy relationship with surfing and making friends that love surfing as well and are on a good path. That's more what it's about for me as a parent. I really want him to have surfing in his life because, like I said, it's just been a really cool thing and a positive. It's been zero negatives with surfing from my life. It's been something that no matter if I did it for a living or not, I would surf every day.
One of the cool things that you were talking about and that we talked about last year when we were hunting together is I've seen just from the outside looking in briefly that not only are you're continuing to surf, but that you're evolving too, your approach to it. And I think this is something a lot of guys can get from our conversation is, you talked to me about the, I'm going to butcher this, but the wetsuit with the flotation devices, I think built into it that you helped create. Yeah. And so that's a way for you to stay involved in the industry, but maybe at an evolved level or a different level than you have in the past, which is just riding waves, right? And I see that, I'm like, man, that's really cool. Like now he's innovating in the industry that has served him well over his entire life.
Yeah, I mean that that was a lot of fun, like coming up with that idea and developing it. It was, and it's really cool because before that happened, there was quite a few people passing away surfing big waves because they were drowning. We started surfing waves that were so big that no matter how fit you are, no matter how long you can hold your breath, the waves, at some point are too strong.
Right.
You're going to lose if you fight Mother Nature in the ocean. And so I developed a suit, like you said, that has like built-in CO2 cartridges and a big air bladder, and it like you pull on, like kind of like the backcountry, like the backcountry backpacks I've seen, like for heli skiers,
right, for avalanches.
They get
Sure.
caught in avalanche. Yeah, you pull the things, and it blows up into a huge bubble and pulls you to the top of the avalanche. So that was kind of the inspiration for that, for surfing. Was I was trying to make sure that I could get back to the surface. If the wave was too big and I couldn't get there on my own power, I wanted some help, and not because I wanted to. I simply wanted to make things safer for myself so I could justify continuing surfing big waves. That was the point. Surfing big waves had become so dangerous in my life. I felt like there was so much risk with a young family and a wife at home and a lot to lose. I just wanted to try and make big wave surfing as safe as I possibly could. So I actually never intended it for anyone else. I didn't even think it was going to work, to be honest. And I didn't know that anyone else would be keen to try it. So like once I developed it and had some prototypes, I gave it to some friends and made it available to people. And man, it's really taken off. So like these days, if you go out to any big wave spot in the world, like whether it's Mavericks in Half Moon Bay or Jaws on Maui or any one of like dozens of big wave spots, literally 100% of people are wearing flotation wetsuits and inflatable wetsuits. So it's been a real positive for surfers. As far as industry goes and all that stuff, that's like meaningless to me. But the fact that we haven't had a single person drown surfing big waves with one of those suits on, and there hasn't been anyone pass away since the introduction of the inflatable wetsuit. So that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I bet that's really rewarding to see those statistics and those numbers. I can't even imagine. So I don't know if I told you this, but I know you've got an affinity and background in San Clemente. So when I was, I must have been 12 or 13 years old, I had a really good friend at the time, and he was really into surfing. He was very athletic. He loved the beach. He loved the ocean. And he's like, all right, come surfing with me. I'm like, all right. And I've never really spent much time in the water. So he took me to San Clemente, took me to Trestles, and he's like, all right, here's a board, go surf. And I'm like, okay, what do I do? And he's like, you just paddle and then you catch the wave and you stand up on the board. I'm like, all right, I'll try it. And I swear, I remember to this day, probably a 3-foot or a 4-foot wave, if that, literally tried to kill me. And I remember being under the water, and then I get up and that next wave rolled in and crashed down on top of me right as I got back up to the top of the surface. And I just put my board down. I said, I'm done with this. I'm not doing this anymore. So I think I spent the rest of the time on the beach while my buddies were in the water. What's the biggest wave that you have surfed?
That's a good question. Probably about 70 feet on the face.
Holy cow, man. I can't imagine that. What's your thought process? You see this wave and you're like, I don't know. I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm really curious, but it's like, I want to conquer that wave. I want to tame that wave. Like, what is your thought process when you see that and you're like, I want to ride that? Because that's not probably a normal thought. Or a common. Maybe not normal is the right word, but it's not a common thought.
Yeah, it's funny because for me, it's not even fun. It's more of like the fun is not so much the riding the wave part. The fun for me is conquering my fear and rising to the challenge. That's something that terrified me when I was a kid. Like anytime the waves got really big, I was terrified, and I would see pictures in magazines of guys riding really big waves, and I would be like, I'm never going to do that in a million years. Never, 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 never. And I grew up at a place in Hawaii where the waves don't get very big. It's really rare when the waves are big where I live, and so I grew up with little waves. And so I was terrified of big waves when I was a kid, and something that didn't come naturally to me when I was young. And then when I moved to the North Shore, like I told you, when I was 15, I got introduced to surfing big waves very quickly. I ended up living with friends who were really good at surfing big waves and extremely into it. So, and they were radical into peer pressure.
Of
And so when the
course.
waves got big, I didn't have a choice. I was going
Right.
surfing in big waves, whether I liked it or not. And I ended up liking it. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I loved the challenge. I loved the personal challenge of like being scared and being able to face that fear and rise to the challenge and kind of make sense of my emotions and all of that stuff. Like staying level headed and in an intense situation and under pressure was something that I thought was a lot of fun.
Have you had any sort of close encounters where you legitimately thought, I'm under this wave, I'm under the water, like this is it, I'm gonna die right here?
Yes, I have. Twice. Once when I was 18 years old, I was surfing in Outer Reef here on the North Shore, just a couple miles away from where I am now. Um, I was surfing with two of my friends. They were older than me. They were like my heroes growing up. They were incredible big wave surfers, and we were the only three out there. And I let my ego take over, and I went on a wave because I wanted to impress my friends. You know, these older guys that I really looked up to. I want that, I wanted them to see that I had what it took in big waves, and I went on a wave that I definitely shouldn't have, out of pure ego, and I ended up falling, and I got the wind knocked out of me as I fell. It was like getting like body slammed by like a big 300-pound dude, just body slamming you on your chest. I lost all the air on impact, and then got held underwater for two waves. So I was underwater for a long, long time, and then I was like trying to swim up, and my body was, I don't know if you've ever tried to hold your breath for a super, super long time, but your body will do these involuntary, like,
Right.
I don't know
Right.
if you've ever had that, but I was doing that as I was swimming up, and I had no air left at all, and I was about 15 feet from the surface. And the next wave, so I was underwater so long that the next wave started breaking over me, and that wave pulled me straight back down, and I lost consciousness. This is going to sound super cosmic and cheesy, but I basically don't remember anything after that until all of a sudden I like regained consciousness, whatever you want to call that. I'm not very like into cosmic stuff, but I remember like looking up and realizing all of a sudden that I was like 5-6 feet away from the surface and swimming up to the surface. And I got to the surface, and I was throwing up all this stuff from inside. I had like a bunch of water in my lungs, and all this foam and orange stuff was coming out of my stomach and my lungs. And I'd been underwater for 3 waves, and my two friends, I could see them, and I was like seeing double, and my legs felt like they didn't want to work. And I was crying uncontrollably, and I had the most crazy, emotional experience. And I thought I was going to die for sure in that moment. When I was losing consciousness and losing my breath, swimming up, and that next wave broke over me, that was extremely terrifying. And one of my friends that day had that similar experience right before me, like the year before. And so I got washed all the way to shore, and both of my friends came in, and my one friend, Brock Little, he sat down with me for a while, and I was like crying like a baby. And he just said, "Hey man, like I had that same experience about a year ago. I realized I could die. I realized I was immortal. And it's real, man. Like you can really die doing this stuff. And so you don't want to surf with your ego. You really have to make calculated decisions. And the next time the waves get big, we're going straight back out there." And so about a week later, the waves got big, and we paddled out to the same surf break. And I got back on the horse, and that was a really important thing for me. And I've been doing it ever since. But it's crazy because both of those friends that I surfed with that day passed away. One of them passed away about 3 or 4 years ago from cancer, and he was probably one of the greatest big wave surfers of all time. The other guy drowned surfing big waves before the introduction of the inflatable wetsuit.
Wow, man, I can't. I got so
Can
many
you hear me,
questions on
Ryan,
that.
or is
Yeah, yeah,
the internet connection okay?
yeah. No, it's good. I can hear you. Okay, are we good? Can you hear me? All right.
Yeah, you let me know. I can shift to my I can shift it. I'm on Wi-Fi right now, but if it starts getting kind of funky, I can switch it to my hotspot.
Yeah, no, I think we're good. I think we're good. I was saying that I have so many questions about that. How do you determine if when you're looking at a wave, okay, is this something that I want to take upon me as a challenge to conquer my fears, or is that my ego speaking? Because there's probably a fine line between being arrogant and overinflated ego, and I think I can do this. I think it's within my skill set, and I want to take upon that challenge.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think if you're just being calculated and you're just making decisions with zero ego, you're never going to be, you're never going to perform at the very top of your potential, because it's like, I really feel that you're only capable of what you believe you can achieve. If you're a stock trader and you believe your upper limitations are having 20% returns a year, you're never going to have 100% returns a year. You have to
Right.
believe that it's possible. If you want to become the greatest football player on earth, you have to believe that you're going to become the greatest football player on earth. There's no way you're going to outperform your goals and your dreams. There's no way. I really, really, truly believe that. And a lot of that has to do with ego. I mean, if you are super, super confident, you go out and surf big waves and you push your risk level up and you have great ability, then you're going to surf really, really well. You're going to surf to your greatest potential. But if you're being too conservative, too humble, too like operating with no ego, then you're probably not going to perform to your upper limits of your potential. So it's a fine line between being able to incorporate your ego and try to become super confident without being pure ego. And I don't know how to explain that, but especially with big wave surfing, because there's serious consequences. I mean, I've had quite a few friends pass away surfing big waves. And so your life is literally on the line. So if you operate with too much ego and you get in over your head, you die. So it's just a balance of trying to make sure you're in the sweet spot of being super prepared, being very confident, and then also using kind of progressive exposure, if you will, into like, hey, I caught one wave, I did everything right, I had great timing, I had great positioning, I'm going to up my risk level slightly. And then, the next wave or the next session, you push it a little bit as you gain experience, and you have that positive feedback of like, yeah, I'm doing this right. But if you're surfing 5-foot waves all the time, and then your goal is to surf 70-foot waves, you can't just bridge that. You can't just like jump. You can't just go
Right.
to that next level all of a sudden,
Right.
even if it's your goal. That's all ego. You need to have like that, set incremental goals on the way. I feel like that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate you saying, I don't know if I'm explaining it right, because how do you explain that that like really fine, thin line? It's very difficult, but I do like that idea. I wrote that down, of progressive exposure. That's an interesting concept. I want to go back to what you said about, you used the term cosmic when you were under the water, when you went through that experience that you just shared with us. Do you think that it was cosmic or divine, or do you think it is what it is and it happened and that's just how it played out? Like, I'm really curious how you've interpreted that moment in time for yourself.
Not divine. And I don't know. I don't know. I interpreted that I got lucky, honestly. I feel like sometimes everything does happen for a reason, that I wasn't supposed to die that day. And that's all I kind of read into it. But it didn't make me start going to church every day. Do you know what I mean? I didn't think like the hand of God reached down and pulled me out of that situation. Not saying that didn't happen. That totally could have happened. And I'm open to that. That's fine. That would be amazing. But yeah, I feel like I wasn't supposed to die that day, and I simply look at it like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I'm always interested in that perspective of how, because isn't real like life, I just look at life, isn't it the way that we interpret it? You know, you can have two things happen to different people and it could be a very similar or just almost identical experience, and two different people can interpret it completely different. And then that interpretation of that event is what causes us in some small way to make different decisions moving forward. And so it's always interesting the way that we interpret our experiences and then what that does to our potential future. That's always something I'm very interested in and curious about.
For sure. And I think everybody's different, and that's the beauty of it, you know. I mean, I don't know. It's I don't know. It's funny. We all have so many different kinds of friends that interpret things totally differently, right? But yeah, that's just my personal perspective of
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's interesting.
How does bow hunting come into the mix? Because here's what I envision. And you know, if I didn't know you better, and maybe if I was just looking from the outside, I'd be like, okay, well, you know, you have this hobby of archery and bow hunting, but you're actually living your hobby. So it's like how do you then shift? Or has this always been part of your life? Because I know hunting is big in Hawaii. So has bow hunting always been a big part of your life too?
No, so I didn't find hunting until I was about 30 years old. So
Mm,
I always lived pretty close to the beach, and then it was always my dream to like live in this area where I live now, up on the mountain, where like now I live in a rainforest, and I live at 4,000 feet elevation, so it's pretty far away from the beach.
yeah.
Um, and it was always my dream to live there, just 'cause it's a beautiful place. There's a lot of privacy and a lot of land, and I love the rainforest. I like the weather, and it's nice and cool up there. I have a fireplace, and so it was like always my dream to live up there. And then when I moved there, all of a sudden I had this problem with the wild boars at my house. So everything I planted, they would just dig up, and they were just digging up the forest all over the place, and they were a nightmare. And so I was planting like trees and plants, and everything would just get dug up. And so and I didn't hunt at all. And so like one of my buddies gave me a shotgun and said, "Hey, you shoot a couple of these things and it'll leave you alone for a while." And so I never owned a gun before. I never had a gun. And so that's exactly what I did. I shot one with a gun, and I realized immediately that guns weren't my thing. I didn't like the noise. I didn't like just the racket they made. I didn't like the power, and I didn't like how dangerous and scary they were to me. And so I immediately gave the gun back to my buddy. And then I met one of my I met one of my neighbors. This is right when I moved there, so I didn't really know anybody. But I met one of my neighbors. He was a bow hunter. He had an extra bow, so I started going over to his house in the afternoons, and we'd have a couple beers, and he taught me how to shoot. And we'd shoot arrows in the afternoon, and I immediately got super hooked on it. And then he was like, "Hey, once you can group your arrows, like we can go hunt one day." And so he took me hunting one evening, and we hunted some pigs, and I made a ton of mistakes, but I instantly loved like that chess match between your skill level and what you were doing and all the choices you're making in real time, and like kind of like how that plays out with the animal and the wind and the terrain, and like trying to be sneaky and trying to be like just that whole game was super interesting to me, and I was fascinated by trying to get better at it and better at archery. And so that was how I got started at bow hunting.
Yeah, I have a very similar experience. I mean, I started later in life. I only started 3 years ago, and I remember even in Arizona when we were down there together. You know, to see
Yep.
a deer and to stock up on a deer that doesn't know you're there, and your heart's beating, and he doesn't know you're there, and you're trying to kill him, and he's trying to stay alive, and he's
Yeah.
trying to outwit you, and you're trying to outwit him.
Yeah.
Regardless of the outcome, it's such a fascinating, wild experience, man. I think you and I have a very similar perspective on that, especially coming into the game late.
For sure. I mean, that's probably one of my biggest regrets is not finding bow hunting earlier. And it was funny because I found surfing extremely early, and a lot of people feel that same way about surfing, that they just really, really wish that they found it earlier in life because it's so much fun. It's so easy to become passionate about surfing, and that was always my first love, and I still love surfing, but I never found anything that could hold a candle to surfing. And then when I found bow hunting, I fell in love with the mountains, and I fell in love with walking in the mountains all day long with my bow. And I always loved camping and being in the outdoors, but I never really had a real reason to go do that. And
Hmm.
so even though like I love bow hunting and stuff, I almost love camping and hiking and just being on adventures and spending multiple days in the woods in a tent. I just love that whole thing. So like the bow hunting part of it is super cool and I love it. But I love the whole experience of like either staying with friends and being in elk camp together or deer camp, or being on a backcountry bow hunt with friends in tents, or being completely alone for a week in a tent and being in the woods on my own. I love all aspects of all those sort of adventure hunts are definitely my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like you're very obviously connected with nature and willing to explore and willing to engage. And I think that there's a lot of power in that. And I think also that we've lost a lot of that too. We live in these concrete jungles and we're always connected, right? And we never take the time to appreciate either the ocean or the mountains or the growth or the animals or whatever it is. And there's so much power that can be found in those things, unplugging and going out and experiencing what the world and nature has to offer for us.
Yeah, it's pretty funny because if I'm at home for a little while and I'm being a jerk to my wife or I'm in a bad mood or I'm cranky and she doesn't know what my problem is, she'd be like, okay, you got to go hunting soon. And then sometimes she'll just call one of my friends and be like, hey, you got to call Shane and take him hunting because he's being a dick right now. it's, it's pretty funny. And so she knows that like a large part of my sanity, a large part of me being at peace and being in a great mood has to do with my consistency of hunting. And so I'm very lucky to live in Hawaii, which is a place that I can hunt 365 days a year for every single species, you know? So I'm extremely lucky. I don't have a hunting season. Hunting season is every day.
Right.
I don't get to go every day, but the fact that I can just, you know, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, all of a sudden my buddy calls me, hey, you want to go on a quick bow hunt? Yeah, I'll just jump in my truck and go meet him real quick, or I'll
Right.
literally walk out my door. I can hunt pigs right outside my house. So I'm extremely grateful for having those opportunities for sure. And it definitely keeps my head on straight.
I mean, it's such an amazing place to do it too. I remember, 3 years ago, I think I was in Hawaii and I'm hunting, but at the same time, I'm walking in a rainforest on a volcano. like, like you
Yeah.
can't be, even if you're not seeing any animals, you're just thinking as you're walking around this rainforest on a volcano in the middle of the ocean that how can this be beat? This is absolutely amazing what it is you're doing right now. And then you get to harvest an
Yeah.
animal and it just is that much better.
Yeah, I agree. It's crazy. I mean, the place that the animals live in Hawaii is amazing. Like, just a couple weeks ago, I was bow hunting and I did a stalk on this huge buck, and I got to 61 yards, and I was starting to draw, and his does caught my wind, and they all ran, and I was upset because I just walked about a mile uphill. I glassed this group of deer from about a mile and a half away, and I had to gain about 1,200 feet of elevation, and I was already pretty high elevation, and I blew the stock. I didn't blow the stock, like the wind blew the stock, but it took me about an hour and a half to get to where that deer was, of like straight, like trying to sprint,
Yeah, man.
because I was afraid he was going to go into the forest where he was. And it ended up not panning out. And and I took a video of myself, like a selfie video in the moment, explaining what just happened so I could relive that moment years from now. And I remember I look back at it now, I'm like sweaty and pissed off and all grumpy because I blew the situation. It almost happened. And he's a monster buck and all this stuff. And I was so frustrated. And then all of a sudden I just realized where I was. And I panned and I was like on the top of this mountain and the ocean's in the background and you could see the surf down below and just like rolling hills. And I was just in the most beautiful place in the world. And I was just like, I can't believe how lucky I am. Like, this is incredible. I just blew the stock. The buck got away and I'm at 100% happiness right now. You know what I mean? It's just, it's so incredible that bow hunting gives us those moments. Whether or not you come home with the animal has nothing to do with it, honestly.
Well, then here you are speaking of that experience with fondness and good memories, even though in the midst of things it was very frustrating, right? And you still speak about it.
Yeah.
It's usually the crappiest situations that create the best stories. And then I don't know what it is about human beings, but we have this incredible ability to forget how shitty a situation was and just remember those situations and the positives and the benefits of everything that you just went through.
Yeah. I mean, anyone who bow hunts can relate. I mean, bow hunting can be incredibly frustrating. It's amazing how many things can go wrong in a row.
Yeah, for
You know what I
sure.
mean?
Oh,
Because
yes. I'm intimately familiar with that.
if you are 10 yards away from a giant bull elk and you execute a perfect shot and it goes in the perfect pocket and that elk goes 20 yards and keels over in front of you, you know how many things have to go right for that moment to happen?
Yeah.
Like 100 things in a row. Like this went right, and then this went right, and then I made that choice, and this went right. The wind did the right thing, and then so I went behind this tree. That went right. Then I covered that ground and went from 100 yards to 70 yards. And then his cows weren't looking at me, and then it's like a million little puzzle pieces have to fall into place for that perfect execution of that opportunity and making the most of that crunch time under pressure. Is just, that's what fascinates me about bow hunting. Is it's so damn hard, it's so damn challenging. The odds are stacked against you. You have to get in range, like despite the odds. I mean, hunting axis deer here in Hawaii is ridiculous. Like I was just hunting, and I could not find a group of deer under 50. There was 50 deer minimum in a group,
Tons. Right.
and which sounds really good, right? Yeah. Oh my god, yeah. This
They're
guy's
everywhere.
whinging about having 50 deer. Try to get in bow range of 50. If I had a gun, I would have killed the 5 biggest bucks in that group easily. Bang, 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 bang. They're all dead. But it didn't work like that. I have to get 40 yards away. And so I was getting schooled by these deer because there's 100 eyeballs
Yeah, they're
in
busting
50
you.
deer. And so that's what I love about it. I love how damn tough it is. So when you do have that moment when you walk up to your deer and it's time to get to work with your knife and the meat care and getting it all field dressed and, you know, taking care of that meat, when that moment happens, it's so satisfying because so many things went right. I love that. I'm fascinated by how many things have to go right to have that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, I hope you and I can get on another hunt soon. I'll be out there next year. We'll have to connect if we can and make it work, but I'd love to hunt with you again. Shane, I really appreciate you, man. I appreciate your perspective and all that you've done. I've been inspired by what you're doing. It's cool to see. You know, the thing that I'm inspired by mostly, out of all the things that you've done and all the things that I've seen on Instagram and our conversations, is how you lead your children. You know, I see that, and I don't know if it's rare. I don't think it's rare, but it's just something that we don't get to see a lot. And so for me to be able to see that, and the people that are connected with you to be able to see that, I think that's really, really powerful. And I think it's a message and an action that needs to be shared more in society. And you're living it, man. So I'm honored we could have this conversation today.
Thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate it. And really fun to be on the show. And I agree. I mean, it's funny because it's happening everywhere. There's good dads everywhere.
No
There's
doubt.
good parents everywhere. I mean, we all know so many of them, and there's so many good dads that aren't on a podcast. There's so many good dads that aren't on Instagram. There's so many good dads that aren't exposing that side of things. We're just inundated with all this BS. And so you never get to see it, but it's happening all around us. And that's, I feel like it's so important to just remember that. Like a lot of the crap that we get fed all day long, it's not reality. It's not the real deal. There's incredible parents out there doing the right thing. And I'm inspired all the time by people who don't live their lives on social media. And then even though it's a part of my job and it's something that I do all the time, I think it's important to watch shows and follow accounts and watch podcasts that expose good parents and people who are trying to do the right thing.
Right on, brother. We'll keep leading. You and I will stay connected. I'm looking forward to building our friendship. But again, appreciate you. And thanks for taking some time today, man.
Sounds good, man. Let's go bow hunting soon.
Absolutely.